sides in Washington. There is a new agreement, it seems. I don't know what does that mean. It's because what was so interesting after the meeting Iran and the United States had in Switzerland, basically talking about the situation in southern Lebanon. You see the president of Lebanon coming out and saying, so Israel has to withdraw totally from Lebanon. For the first time they're somehow talking this way. And then you see the agreement in Washington, in the United States, between the two sides. And how do you see the two sides? One of them is the Strait of Hormuz is so important, and the other one is the case of Lebanon. Is there any sort of hope for any of this, being resolved?
I hope so, yes. I mean, I think several things. I think the probability of us going back in are very remote in terms of military or kinetic engagement. Secondly, what Larry Johnson and others have been reporting, Brandon Weichert and others, has now been confirmed by a range of media reports, which is that the various attacks by Iran on the U.S. military bases, particularly the center of the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, that many of these bases are utterly not only unoccupied now, but seen as beyond meaningful repair. So that the beginning of the exit of the United States from the Middle East is probably already in progress at some level. And then the question becomes the Strait of Hormuz and the Lebanon and Israel. And so I think the possibility of military kinetic conflict between the U.S. and Iran is very remote at this stage. It is just diminishing by the day. I think the Strait of Hormuz will be open at some level because there's only so much Iran, I think, can practically do, or I should say diplomatically do, with the Strait of Hormuz to leverage their power against Israel in particular. That you look at, one reason why Iran's efforts to get the economic pressure on the U.S. At a higher rate than ultimately occurred over the last 100 days is because of its own ally, China. China has to put its own priorities first, and those priorities are stability in the global economic south, where China depends on an export-driven economy to be able to be sustainable in their current economic environment. A range of reasons for that, partially the COVID lockdowns and the economic ramifications of that. Part of it, the global financial crisis, freezing up liquidity markets and capital markets in ways that have never come back to pre-2008 levels globally. Part of it, an internal real estate problem where a real estate bubble popped in China, partially deliberately by the government's own work, but it still has had its negative ramifications and ripple effects in the Chinese economy. And you aggregate those factors, China was not in a position to afford a global economic collapse, even if it wanted to aid its ally, Iran. And the reason why oil and gas never hit that $150, $200 price that people thought it would, given the length of time the strait was closed, is because China was massively emptying its own strategic reserves, which are much higher than anywhere else in the world because they bought up a lot of oil at dirt cheap prices when it hit 50, 60 bucks a barrel over the last half decade. And they helped the global south, and particularly Southeast Asia, Korea, Japan, Australia, places that have not always been, and still aren't really, allied to China because it just can't afford the economy to collapse. What that means is Iran's not in a position where it can continuously, completely close the strait just for any leverage reason it wants. Legally, it's better standing if it's being attacked or being blockaded. But diplomatically, does it want to risk its relationship with China, number one purchaser of its oil and gas during the sanctioned era over the past decade or so? I don't see that. One of the main strategic allies, one of its main military allies, one of its main allies in the United Nations against various resolutions that have been against Iran. But China has also good relations with most of the Gulf countries as well. So I think that puts a practical limit. And I think what we're going to see is people tease out and test out how much that can work. What some of us had been arguing to the administration was the blockade and the threat of kinetic conflict gives cover to Iran to close the strait. And even if China is providing some relief valve, that relief valve is going to run out sooner or later. And as President Trump himself admitted, that relief valve was going to go empty by August. And then we're in serious trouble. So I think that Iran can only use now that there's no real threat of a blockade. I don't think, I think we'll find out in the coming days and weeks or so that you'll start seeing. And the thing to watch is, when do we start actually bringing U.S. troops home? When do we start bringing the carrier ships and the battleships and the big boats back home to the U.S. shores? When do you see some of the big planes and some of the military deployment there? About 50,000 plus troops or so. When do you see above and beyond the normal baseline? When do you see that coming back home? Do you see no real efforts to repair the bases that have been hit so hard? If you see that aggregation taking place, then the risk of U.S. kinetic conflict with Iran goes way down. And that in turn means Iran can only do so much leverage with the Strait of Hormuz. It can do a little bit here and a little bit there, but only so much can it do for Lebanon. At that point, its greater leverage as to Israel becomes its ability to attack Israel, especially to attack Israel without U.S. backing, without U.S. support. What Vice President Vance, who's the entire architect of this deal, getting any deal, that he was able to negotiate and navigate the treacherous terrain of Washington, D.C., the Israel lobby, President Trump's King Lear mindset. I don't know if you saw, Iran had accepted the theory that Larry Johnson and I had presented, which was that Trump is not the same Trump. And that from their perspective, according to published reports, what really improved their understanding of what was happening and their negotiation tactics and strategy was to hire a bunch of shrinks. I mean, whoever knew that? Bring in some shrink. Iran, of course, one of the most educated populations in the world, and tell us, okay, assume Trump has this mental health issue or this mental health issue. How do we translate what he's saying? And then how do we respond back in negotiation? And I think they did it very well and very ably in that respect. But I think they understand they got a King Lear situation in the American White House, and so they're going to navigate that carefully. Apparently, the Russians, according to Ambassador Lavrov, their foreign minister Lavrov, who told Rick Sanchez, who told me that Trump they'd figured that out back after December when there was an attempted attack on Putin in Russia by the CIA in Ukraine. And Trump was acting like he didn't remember what he negotiated in last August in Anchorage. So I think given that combination of circumstances, the X factor becomes, does Israel and Iran start up their own war all over again without U.S. involvement? And as the message got relayed, and to a degree, the last time Iran hit Israel, the U.S. did not defend them. At least that's what came through the military chain of command. Israel cannot win a war against Iran. Its only hope was U.S. protection at a minimum, U.S. defenses at a minimum. If they're getting the message that there won't be U.S. defenses, Bibi can have all the braggadocious talk he wants. Ben-Gvir and all the lunatics can say we're going to make all the Lebanese mommies cry because apparently going full Nazi is the new ideology in parts of Israel. But practically speaking, Israel will get hammered in such a conflict. They're more vulnerable in their energy supply and their water supply to hits just due to the size of the country. That, I think someone said Iran is like 93 times bigger than the land of, so it's like you just do the math. That's math that ain't mathin'. And consequently, I think maybe that's hope. Also, Lebanon is such a proxy. These current political leaders in Lebanon, I should say, are such a proxy of the United States that if you see them shifting position, it means the U.S. has told them to shift position. Mm-hmm. I do know that Vice President Vance was reaching out to other groups in Israel, letting the message get relayed to Bibi that we may actually aggressively assist his opponents rather than him. That means, if he loses the next election, he goes to prison with his wife in all likelihood. So I think they're starting to play, but Vance knows how to play hardball, and he's learned this lesson the hard way through this unfortunate military adventure. The Trump has been erratic and sporadic, and I think that will continue to be the case. But if Vance's side of the equation continues to exercise its leverage, then and do so through its leverage on the Lebanese governing officials, who again, like I said, are quasi-elected officials, but the nominal head of Lebanon currently against Israel rather than in Israel's pocket, then that could lead to Israel having to withdraw from Lebanon, which some military officials within Israel think is a better idea anyway, because they're getting their rears whipped. Yeah, you can raze to the ground, Gaza style, a whole bunch of homes and communities, but you can't hold it. You raise it to the ground and you still can't hold it. from Hezbollah. And everybody knows they're not taking out Hezbollah. And Lebanon has been the cemetery of Greater Israel projects now going on 40 years. Did it in the 80s, did it in 2000s. It will be a sort of, history rhymes kind of situation, because the last time there was a meaningful U.S. resistance on Israel's expansionistic politics in the Middle East was concerning Lebanon and was concerning President Reagan. That's what I've been urging the White House and urging people talking to President Trump to remind him of. The President Reagan strategy was get out and tell Israel to stand down. And that's what happened in Lebanon after our Marines died. He didn't use it as a pretext to double down. He realized that's stupid. We're getting the heck out of there. He realized he made a mistake by even sending him there. And the next thing he did is he realized to have peace in Lebanon, you needed to have Israel stand down. And he used language like Holocaust. This is stuff the Mark Levins of the world pretend don't exist in the Reagan history. The Reagan history is not the fanciful